My name is Dr. Teagan Westendorf. I'm an analyst at ASPE in Defence and Strategy, and I am interviewing Dr. Ayesha Jehangir, who is an academic at the Centre for Media Transition at the University of Technology, Sydney. This is an interview as part of ASPE's Women in Defence and National Security Profile series. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people from whose lands I'm dialing in today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Ayesha, it is wonderful to see you. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me, Teagan. I'm really excited to be here. I'm doing well and can't wait to start our talk.
So I have 4 things that I want to talk to you about today. And I'm going to kick off with asking you a little bit about your career as an academic so far. So the dreaded question, what was your PhD about, which you finished at the University of Wollongong? And what was the most joyful or satisfying experience or part of the experience of being a postgraduate research student for you?
Yeah, thank you, Teagan. I would first like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land. I want to let you know that I'm connecting with you from the land of the Dharawal people. I acknowledge their traditional owners, past, present, and emerging, and also that the sovereignty of this land was never ceded. Yes, my PhD, a relationship that I've had. I think this has been one of the strongest and one of the longest relationships that I've had is with my PhD. So my PhD is basically a study of media discourses of war and peace. I particularly examined how Afghan refugees were framed or are being framed in Pakistani media, and also studied factors that influence this sort of coverage, such as the Pakistani state and its involvement in Afghan politics and crises, such as those that happening now over the last year, the role of Pakistani military establishment in Afghan Soviet war, then the US war on terror, and the Taliban taking over the country at both times in the 90s and last year. So I took a discourse historical approach in my critical analysis, which not only helped me map the current state of play of how refugees are framed, but also link it to the political developments of the past that have had their ripple effect and are still having a ripple effect on Afghan refugees and their treatment by Pakistani officials, security agencies, and of course, media.
That sounds like such an interesting project, Ayesha. Now, can I ask you about the most joyful or satisfying part of the postgraduate research experience for you? Because I think that there is often a lot of focus on the challenges, and it is a hugely challenging task and a massive achievement. But I think there's a lot of joy in there as well. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I think both as a journalist and as a researcher, I think what has been most satisfying for me is giving voice to invisible people. By saying invisible, these are groups of people, ethnicities, population that have existed, have problems, have serious challenges that they face either at the hands of media or state or interstate politics or war and conflict. Most importantly, I think the most important has been having first-hand experiences with them, witnessing their stories, becoming an ethical witness, and then taking their stories and then putting them in mainstream media. Unfortunately, most of the times their stories that we find on ground, some of them make it to mainstream media, but they cannot. They're still adulterated, which means that we're not getting to see the real picture there. And I think that has been one of the most fulfilling aspects of both as a journalist and as a researcher.
That's such an inspiring example of how being a researcher, we need to be objective, but you actually have the opportunity to have such insight into individual and collective experiences at a really deeply personal level of what's affecting people's lives and where their lives are going. So interesting. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about your experience working as a war journalist. It's easy to note that it's such a really male-dominated space, both specifically in terms of the gender of most war journalists that we see in international media, and also that there are so many other aspects about military conflict that are obviously very male-dominated. Now, it sounds like a really dangerous and emotionally exhausting experience, and watching Ukrainian war journalists broadcast in such real time, I think, has been a really confronting reminder to all of us of that fact. So in the wake of Western powers pulling out of Afghanistan last year, and the really devastating images that we saw of Afghan people so desperate to get out of the country as Taliban control was to be retaken, Ayesha, do you have ideas about how the Australian discourse on refugees has potential to be changed as we see this Western nation building project really collapse? And I'm asking that regarding how, as Australian citizens, we value the contributions of refugees in our society, and move even beyond this idea of contributions or folk needing assistance, but just value refugees in and of themselves.
Yeah, sure. There are two aspects to it. I'll start with a shorter one. As a researcher and a university academic who's also taught young students, young university students, or had a conversation with people at large, one thing that I have noted, unfortunately, is that I haven't found my Australian circle very well aware of what's happening outside Australia. I'm not saying that everyone's like that, but I'm not talking about intellectuals or academics or journalists. I'm talking about people, and that is where discourse hits the most, right? Who is discourse created for? It is created for public to consume and then create their realities and construct some meanings, and then that's their reality. Now, I just want to remind you that discourse making is a long process, just like it takes years and years and sometimes generations to construct certain narratives, to shape a discourse. Changing it is equally time consuming, a process that requires patience and consistent effort. So following up and doing, reminding people and re-educating and reinforming them again and again. Now, there's a researcher, Anne O'Keefe. She puts it brilliantly in her work on media and discourse. So in media, she writes that discourse is manufactured and its function is to develop or construct meaning, context, and interaction between the text and the audience. So to understand and analyze discourse or construct discourse, it's to infer the meaning of the language that is used. So it's not only the meaning that develops through certain language use, but language also adds context to text, and that is very important. And thus, these two factors in language, meaning and context, help construct and retain discourse. Now, additionally, it is also very important to remember that construction of discourse is directly proportional to the reality that is created about that subject, which means how is it that that society defines that certain subject and their impacts. For example, the meaning and impact of refugee migration, for instance, which is my area, is different for different countries. For Pakistan, it means economic pressure, poverty, threats of terrorism, because terrorists have used refugee identity to get into the country. Similarly, for Europe, refugee means something completely different. In Australia's case, it's either boat people who should go back to where they came from, or the complete opposite, because they're viewed as a market citizenship. Now, I was reading a very interesting journal paper this morning from the Journal of Refugee Studies, and it talks about constructions of Australia's ideal refugee through discourses, social and media discourses. Now, the paper revealed strong themes of assimilation alongside this neoliberal concept of market citizenship, where the ideal, quote unquote, ideal refugee is positioned as achieving economic success through contributions to the Australian labour market. And if that is not achievable, then a refugee is someone that is not needed. So that is what needs to change. And who is going to change it? academics are trying to figure out what the problems are, where are the problems, identify them, and tell solutions and suggest solutions to policymakers. But it's after policymakers, of course, it's media that's going to change the discourse. It's media that's going to start narratives of justice and represent an ethical, true representation, so that the image and then the treatment and then the narrative and then, of course, in the longer term, the discourse changes, which takes years and years, as I mentioned.
That was brilliant, Ayesha. Is this what we can expect to see in your upcoming book, which I understand you're writing at the moment? Because it sounds like a fascinating project of taking apart the way that our very values are constructed by politics, discourse, and media interacting at the really grassroots, day-to-day level of Australian citizens' lives.
Yeah, definitely. So my book is, and I want to tell you that it's my first ever book, and it's about refugees, their representation by media, and the role of state. Now, by looking at these, by listening to these words, it looks like just another work on refugee state. But here I'm trying to look at it from the lens of from the frameworks of peace journalism, and I'm also in some parts of the book trying to and attempting, I don't know how that will go, but I'm trying to redefine peace journalism and conflict sensitive journalism for networked spaces, because now we're not only witnessing war from our traditional media, television or news, or print. We're also witnessing it through social media, through other digital platforms, through groups, closed groups of people. So we're becoming part of the distant crisis, but in a very networked manner on digital platforms. So that's what I'm trying to look for, and find new ways of framing and representing, and all the power politics between state, media, and of course how refugees are framed and represented.
It sounds absolutely fascinating and a really timely project, particularly for Australians. So I, for one, am very excited to read it and look forward to hearing about the publication. I'm going to finish up with some reflections about enabling women in the sectors that you've worked in, the next gem that we love to talk about. So if you could give 20-year-old Ayesha one piece of advice and one item of clothing, what would it be?
I think for an item of clothing, I feel cold most of the time, and I think that's also one of the reasons why people around the world absolutely love Australia, because of its weather. So it's going to be one big jacket that is either going to be come handy as either a pillow or a big jacket if I'm feeling cold. So I think definitely have a good comfortable jacket with you throughout the year. 20-year-old Ayesha, yeah, it's very interesting. You'll be surprised. I've never thought about giving myself advice going back. But I think one thing that I would definitely like to tell myself is that, and I think it might have some context from where I come from and the way I've been brought up, is that a lot of toxicity is transferred, especially in women, in the name of culture. So we do accept toxic ways of lifestyle because they've been labeled as something that we do. This is either culture, this is religion, this is our society. So I would like to tell the 20-year-old Ayesha or any other woman in my shoes is to try to free yourself from the shackles of culture and any things that hold you. So don't be scared to live out of the box. I know that when we're in it, it's very difficult to think that we will be able to survive when we're out of it. But when we're out of it, life just becomes much easier. I go back in time and I see it, all the mistakes that I've made and all the decisions that I should have taken differently is because I think, this cultural context, the high context really plays a lot of roles. So yeah, free yourself. The lesser the baggage, the easier the journey.
That's a beautiful answer. And I'm going to add to that a cheeky little become a researcher, because then you're really good at identifying and analyzing and, psychologizing the baggage and tearing your way out of it. That's really great advice. I'm going to finish with a question about who inspires you, either professionally or personally. Maybe it's a personal hero, maybe it's an author of a book, but who lights a fire in your belly and makes you want to get out there and climb mountains?
Well, I'm sure there are a lot. The kind of person that I am, I do have, my heroes keep changing because the world is changing. There are new problems, new problems need new solutions, need new people to come and bring their insights. But there's one person that I would like to pay my respects and tribute to is Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as Bacha Khan. So I'll tell you a little bit about. So he was a Pashtun freedom fighter. I also come from the Pashtun ethnicity from the borders of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So he was an independence activist who worked alongside Mahatma Gandhi against British colonial rule in India. He was a political and spiritual leader known for his non-violent opposition and a non-violent movement in the Indian subcontinent. And he also was a big advocate for the Hindu-Muslim unity, which of course became one of the most, the reasons why the Indian subcontinent split. So I think I have a picture of him right there. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I've learned a lot about peace and non-violence from Bacha Khan and Gandhi. So I think at this time, I would like to pay my tributes to both of these leaders. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Ayesha. It was a genuine pleasure, and I've learnt so much from hearing you speak, and I'm itching to go and Google these names and read about these people and places. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It's always love talking about our work and hopefully inspiring younger people who want to be here soon.
Absolutely.